Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about technological development and what it can or can't do for global warming. I'm going to, as I often do, use some military examples to illustrate the point that technology is not going to come and save the day in the near term. Specifically, going to talk about the Boeing YA-1. That was a 747 that was supposed to mount a laser and shoot down missiles. So that seems like a pretty good example if you wanted to talk about fusion and compare it to a military program, or if you want to go more in the pipe dream category and carbon capture, you can use that. Just to give you some context, the YA-1 spent over $5 billion in development, and it was not successful. So that's kind of the spoiler for the story. So military regularly tries to transition things rapidly to deployment. And just as when we talk about climate change, there are things that we really want to get out there quickly. But wanting and being able to do are two entirely different things. So while the military tries to do this a lot, there are, for every success, there are lots of examples of failures. And you could take this on the commercial side, right? And venture capitalists, they fund 100 projects, hoping that they get one or two big winners and a few that aren't too bad, understanding that they're going to get 90 failures. Military may not use those terms, but that sort of a comparison isn't entirely inappropriate. So there's a lot of reasons in talking about the YA-1. What went wrong with that? Well, to start with, you had a questionable concept that it could ever be an effective system. And that's important when you're looking at, say, carbon capture. It's hard for me to see how that is a big hitter or a big savior. Nuclear fusion, yeah, maybe a little more, but that's probably harder to do. The 747 getting close enough to its targets that it could shoot down missiles without getting shot down itself, there just weren't going to be a lot of examples that were going to work well for it. Now, today, right, we have things going on in the Red Sea, and wouldn't it be neat to have one of those? Well, even then, you're better off just having a destroyer with some missiles locally to shoot it down. The maintenance cost of that 747 would have been huge. And as I said, I got to see some of this up front. So it was not a program I worked on, but as with any military officer, I spent a year on staff for a general, and he went around and would do periodic reviews of programs. And this was one of them. And during that review, the general who was in charge presented all the actions they were taking to rapidly develop technology, and they were trying to go straight from concept to a deployable system. And that is a huge and rarely successful process. Because in the military, and NASA uses this too, there's this thing called technological readiness levels. And it's 1 through 9, with 9 being a very mature system, 1 being an idea that someone might want to do in a lab somewhere that's never been tried before. When you were looking at that 747 with these new chemical lasers and all the targeting that had to go with it, you were talking at something that was at a TRL of 3 or 4. As a general rule, and it's going to vary on how hard the technology is, to move from one level to the next is going to be a 1 to 3 year process. So the idea that you were going to take something that was at a 3 or a 4 and progress it straight from there all the way to a 7, and you were going to do that in 3 or 4 years' time, it was never a very likely situation. The people who were working on that, they were really smart people, and they did manage to get it in the air in the end, so that much was good. And they even fired it once in a simulated role. But frankly, we could have probably saved a billion or two, because I know when I looked at the program during that review, it was clear it wasn't going to get there. And after it took its second shot, that was kind of okay. We learned a few things. We learned what we can do, and that's all well and good. But there's no way this is going to make a lot of sense. It's too much money. And going back to my Red Sea example, it's going to cost around $100 million a year just to operate one of these planes. So after the second one, it was sent out to the desert, where it was eventually chopped up for parts. So, sad end to the program. It wasn't even kept around as a test bed because it was just too expensive and it wasn't going to get the bill. That's why I don't look at a lot of the things you'll see on these different YouTube channels, like Just Have a Think, or some of Sabine's stuff where they're talking about a new tech and is it almost ready. To start with, Just Have a Think. The guy who's doing it, he's a good media guy, but he doesn't know how to evaluate technologies. And if I was going to do it, I would need a few days. And the next time there's a venture capitalist wanting me to go evaluate a fusion project, I'm all there for them. But it's not something you do in a 10-minute YouTube video. You got to go through all the specifications, see what needs to be qualified. To go back to the YA-1, part of the issues there is, yeah, has the 747 flown? Sure. But there's a reason it takes a decade to get a new airplane into the air and deemed airworthy. It's a lot of complex engineering. And so when you start to plummet with all sorts of new chemicals and you're running all sorts of systems that are going to generate heat in ways that 747s don't normally see, and you're changing in a big way the weight and balance of the airplane. Get that had that big heavy laser out on the nose. On the flip side, it had no passengers. Big change for a plane like that. So all of those little things needed to be taken care of, even if you had a perfectly functional laser that was going to do the bill. And of course, you didn't have that. You were trying to both build the laser and miniaturize it at the same time. Same thing with, say, fusion. You see in the news things going on about, hey, we've achieved a balance of energy. When you dive into the details of that, are they making progress? Yes. Do I think fusion research is worthwhile? Yes. In the long term, even what we're doing today isn't going to be the solution. So hopefully fusion will get there, but it's not going to be there in 2040, and I wouldn't bet on it in 2060. If it's there in 2060, it's in a very small way, and you have to accept there is a chance that it may never get there. So that's why fusion and carbon capture, while it might be a little easier technically, in that case, you have the question not that dissimilar from the airplane laser question of, can you generate enough energy in a compact form to make it work in an effective way? Carbon capture is going to need energy to take the carbon out that we put into the air because we used energy. There's an inherent paradox there that you almost need the fusion reactor to make the carbon capture economically feasible. So, in a similar vein, I'm not going to talk much about batteries, and I'm not even going to use a military example specifically, because these new batteries you'll hear talked about and new types of windmills and what have you, for them to be near term successes, it basically assumes that all the people who've been looking at this problem for the past 30, 40, 50 years were idiots and didn't see the easy, obvious answer. I ran into this, especially the last 10, 20 years of my career, where people would come in, oh, well, everything that was done before was wrong. No, it wasn't wrong. There were good reasons, and they spend about a year and then they figure that out. It's not happened to date for a reason. There's a lady who does a thing on thorium reactors, which is really good, where she cites, hey, you have this weapons proliferation issue, so that's why they're not in use. That issue is there, it's real. There are reasons why battery makers have gone with lithium and some of the things they're trying to do with solid state. Do I think, with all these different efforts, that batteries will get better? Well, I do. I do think they will. But we're going to go back to if there's 10 approaches, a lot of them are going to run into things that you just can't anticipate today, but maybe one of them will get lucky. Even then, it's going to take time. So, anytime you hear of a technology, and fuel cells are a great example of this, it's not new, but it's going to be the solution tomorrow because we finally found a way to make it work. Hey, you should treat that with a healthy dose of skepticism because even our favorite technology, either whipping boy or hero, depending on your point of view, Elon Musk and Tesla, if those cars weren't getting subsidized in the U.S. today, they'd have no chance of being mass produced. There's a lot of reasons to have hope for EVs, but even they are not a sure thing going forward. So, last piece I want to touch on is the thing that happens to me, I almost feel proud, where you get someone come on and wants to debate climate science with you. And I know in my case, he basically just copied and pasted a bunch of stuff from some climate skeptic channels that are out there. I've seen it posted a bunch of places. There's no point in getting in a long debate with him. I said, hey, present a summary, and he didn't. He filled it with a lot of other stuff. I'm going to do a video about how to figure that out when someone's BSing you, but he was too easy a case. And that's just going to be a boomer reflection video. When someone is making those statements, at the end of the day, none of us who are watching or listening to these videos are true climate scientists. So you have to look at a certain amount of the data, see what is making sense, and make a credibility judgment. When someone has to fill their comments with explicatives about why the other side's an idiot or make grand simplifications that a very complex system like the climate can be explained with a 3-sentence equation, it's a good bet that they're full of it. So when I make statements, I may make mistakes. I even did that recently on a Reddit forum, and that was pointed out to me that, hey, I was confusing some things about ideal gases. I was using PV equals nRT, and I was applying it to fluids, and I was relying on my memory. People who have education, sometimes we think we remember things better than we do. And when I got called out, I looked at it and I'm like, yeah. So when I make a mistake, I'll admit it. But I'm not going to get into a debate with someone who's taking basically flat Earth sort of ideas and putting them out there. If they've got a real specific instance, I'm happy to listen to it. Frankly, I look for that sort of stuff. But part of why the issue is very real, from my judgment, is there's just not much good counter argument. I just haven't seen it in a scientific term. So, with that, I'll talk a little bit more on this weekend about some things that I've learned about how to know when a PhD or a guy on the shop floor is having an issue and trying to BS you. So, please like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll talk to you soon.